Good evening, I'm Klaudia Czerwińska and you're watching World News Tonight live from Warsaw. To achieve a just, lasting and comprehensive peace, we must neutralize Putin's game. Lessons must be learned, no rewards, gifts or appeasement of the aggressor, said Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha in response to an announcement of the emergency summit between European and Ukrainian leaders, with US President Donald Trump set to take place on Wednesday. More on that later, but before we dive in, let's take a look at tonight's headlines. Poland looks to bolster cybersecurity with a massive investment. Finland charges crew of Russian Shadow Fleet tanker over Baltic Sea cable sabotage. A Belarusian rappers show in Warsaw leads to over 100 arrests. Before the Trump-Putin meeting on Friday, European and Ukrainian leaders will talk to Donald Trump about taking a tough stance on Moscow. Is this a sign that Europe and Ukraine will have their say in shaping a potential ceasefire? Sonia Gatabishtan reports.
European leaders, including Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, will talk with United States President Donald Trump on Wednesday during an emergency summit convened by German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. Poland, too, will be represented. The reason? The approaching Friday meeting plagued with uncertainty for Europe.
I have a lot of fears and a lot of hopes.
The uncertainty should come as no surprise, as on the one end of the negotiating table on Friday, there will be Vladimir Putin, who launched a full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Russia essentially has shown over the course of the past, not just years, but also decades, and I'm afraid even longer than that it cannot be fully trusted.
And on the other, Donald Trump.
President Trump is not always consistent because he had, if I'm not mistaken, around 5 previously, he had ceasefire proposals or ultimatums, if you will, but he never followed through.
According to EU's top diplomat Kaja Kallas,
any deal between the US and Russia must have Ukraine and the EU included, for it is a matter of Ukraine's and the whole of Europe's security.
Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk echoed the sentiment with respect to Poland's security as he weighed in on Russia's and Ukraine's speculated negotiating positions.
For now, it looks like Putin's proposal is that what Russia has, Russia will keep. What it has seized, it will not give back, and Ukraine should just concede. So the position is unilateral. And it's hardly surprising that for Ukraine, for Kyiv, this is unacceptable. Would this exchange of territories become the key to achieving lasting peace? For now, there is little indication of that, but let's wait.
What concerns me the most is not so much the meeting, but as what is the strategy behind this meeting? What is Trump going to bring to the table to ensure that a ceasefire leads to kind of a just and stable peace? And the Trump administration hasn't signaled anything in that regard, and that's troubling to me.
For the U.S. administration, the mere meeting with Putin and the prospect of a future discussion including Zelensky is a success in and of itself.
One of the most important logjams is that Vladimir Putin said that he would never sit down with Zelensky, the head of Ukraine, and the president has now got that to change. We're at a point now where we're now trying to figure out, frankly, scheduling and things like that around when these three leaders could sit down and discuss an end to this conflict.
But according to experts, the meeting is also a win for Putin.
He's getting to sit down with the leader of the free world, the leader of the most powerful country in the world. Second, by being mano a mano, alone in the room, so to speak, without other players, Putin has achieved an ability to kind of pull the United States away from Europe and from Ukraine to create a possible gap.
While the current agenda points to a Putin-Trump meeting, the unpredictability of the events thus far begs the question if Zelensky might be in attendance on Friday after all.
It is not excluded. Definitely. We have some of the assessments and some of the internal discussions. The decision hasn't been taken yet.
Kaja Kallas urged that in working towards peace, aggression cannot be rewarded. Pursuant to international law, all temporarily occupied territories belong to Ukraine. For TVP World, I'm Sonia Gatabishtan.
As European leaders vie for a place at the table in negotiating the future of Ukraine, President Trump has repeated his claim that the two warring sides may need to swap territory in the pursuit of peace. Our correspondent Alex Kadie is in Kyiv for us and has been looking at what such swap might actually look like. Good evening, Alex. So do we have any clarity on exactly what this mysterious land swap might end up looking?
Well, good evening, Claudia. The first thing to say is that any land swap deal, any concession of land from Ukraine to Russian forces is really a non-starter for the Ukrainian government, for the Ukrainian people. It is against the constitution, it is against the psychology of Ukrainians, one lawmaker told me in the last few days. And President Zelensky has been very clear that it will not be accepted by the Ukrainian side, the idea of conceding land to the Russians. We've heard President Trump in the last hour saying he was a little bit bothered by the constitutional argument from President Zelensky, but nevertheless, the idea of a swap would suggest that the Ukrainian side would have to concede some of their own land in exchange for getting back some of their own land. Let's try and break that down if we can with our first map. Now, this is the Russian proposal put forward in these negotiations. It would include the Ukrainian side handing over the rest of the Donbass region. It is very mineral rich. It has rare earths, it has coal, it has energy in the ground as well, and particularly has the very heavily fortified cities of Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, which are seen as part of a belt of fortresses that has been in place in Ukraine since 2014, since the annexation of Crimea. Now, the reason for the refusal on the Ukrainian side to sacrifice these lands, very simply, it sacrifices Ukraine's defense for the future, and the Ukrainian side very much convinced that Russia will keep pushing after a ceasefire, after a peace deal negotiated by Donald Trump. So let's show you where things are as they stand now. Another perspective on it. You see those four regions of Ukraine partially occupied by the Russian forces. They take up about a fifth of Ukrainian territory. They include Zaporizhia Oblast, which has Europe's largest nuclear power station. Of course, bits of Kherson as well, even though Kherson city itself was liberated by the Ukrainians. So this is where things stand. But clearly the idea of swapping land, not clear on exactly what that will mean. We've heard Donald Trump saying that the Russians have taken some prime land from the Ukrainian side and that they will try to return some to Ukraine. At the moment, details thin on the ground, but perhaps just a non-starter to begin with. Ukraine does not want to cede land. Claudia.
Thank you so much, Alex. That was Alex Kadir reporting live from Kyiv. The Polish government has allocated over 700 million euro to enhancing cyber resilience this year. This comes amidst an increasing number of Russian hybrid warfare attacks targeting not only Poland, but also the Baltic States. More in this report by Natalia Komarov.
Poland's Ministry of Digital Affairs is planning massive investment in the country's cyber resilience. Over 700 million euros have been earmarked for a range of efforts, including a cybersecurity fund, incident response teams, and securing local as well as national government systems.
For a few years now, and especially since the beginning of the full-scale war in Ukraine, the cyber domain has been under the biggest pressure.
This comes just days after a Russian Space Force base located in a town called Pionierski in the Kaliningrad exclave was revealed as the source of GPS jamming over the Baltic Sea. Estonian media outlet Delfi has accessed technical documentation on Russian electronic warfare system Tobo. According to the documents, its installation in Pionierski was finalized between 2021 and 2023, which is also when major GPS interference began in the region.
We have noticed that spoofings and jammings are raised starting from after the Nord Stream pipe being blown.
The Tobo system is meant to protect Russian satellite communications from NATO attacks. However, in reality it seems to be used for offensive rather than defensive operations. Tobo can target Western systems, including Starlink, while Russian systems remain unaffected. It is also capable of spoofing GPS systems, which means it can send false location data to drones, airplanes and ships. Experts believe the system is still in its development stage, with data being collected, frequencies tested, and reactions of NATO allies observed.
This is connected to several hybrid efforts that we're seeing right now. Someone wants to disrupt civil society and bother us here on this side of the Baltic Sea.
While the military is prepared to deal with Russian interference due to its use of alternate means of position fixing or timekeeping, it's impossible to protect civilian infrastructure from the jamming and spoofing.
There is no such thing like setting a clear electromagnetic barrier, let's say, on the border, so that the waves, radio waves, could actually stop on our border.
Poland is not the only affected country that is ready to spend big to counter the threat. For example, Estonia aims to increase its drone capabilities.
As a first decision, we can do this with 400,000 euros from the broad national defense program.
But for many in the region, the GPS jamming is just a fact of life now. One Lithuanian pilot found a unique way to protect his devices.
You fold a box out of tinfoil, place your GPS unit inside, and some applications are then out of reach. They can no longer be interfered with.
As ingenious as it is, a more systemic solution might be needed in the future. For TVP World, Natalia Komarov.
And staying with the topic of Russian hybrid warfare on the Baltic, Finland has charged a group of maritime workers with cutting an undersea power cable connecting Finland and Estonia in December. The prosecution laid charges against the captain and first and second officers of the Eagle-class oil tanker over the incident that occurred in the Gulf of Finland in late 2024. Finnish authorities said the Cook Islands registered Eagle-class broke the S-Link 2 undersea power cable connecting the two countries as well as 4 internet lines. The foreign nationals have been charged with aggravated criminal mischief and aggravated interference with communications by dragging the ship's anchor for around 90 kilometers across the seabed. They have denied committing these offenses. The Eagle-class is believed to be a part of Russia's shadow fleet. These vessels are crude oil tankers used by the Kremlin to circumvent sanctions. Over 100 detentions and nationalist symbols on display. This was the aftermath of Saturday's performance of Max Korsh, a Belarusian rapper in Warsaw. But what was the actual message behind the artist's show at Warsaw's National Stadium? Anastasia Yanchenko has more details and brings us this next report.
129 people were detained by police and hundreds of law enforcement officers were deployed to maintain order to a performance by Belarusian singer Max Korsh in Warsaw. The artist drew around 60,000 people to Warsaw's National Stadium. Tickets were sold out within a few hours of going on sale back in September 2024. And his songs have millions of plays on streaming platforms.
Max Korsh is one of the most popular performers in post-Soviet space, a hitmaker whose songs are widely known among young audience. He is the first Russian-language performer to achieve such a success not only in Poland but in Europe.
However, in the Polish capital, Korsz's performances will be remembered as one of the most scandalous concerts of recent years. Hundreds of arrests, littering, public order violations, heavy police involvement. This was the dark side of the long-awaited show, which ended up shocking many local residents. Problems began a day before the concert when fans staged an illegal gathering in Warsaw's Wola district, using flares and fireworks.
An unregistered mass event took place at this location. Hundreds of people were there. The organizers failed to ensure proper security or report the event in accordance with applicable laws. There was very loud music and a huge crowd. The organizers of this unregistered mass event must cover the cleanup costs.
The performance turned out to be no less scandalous, with videos showing chaotic scenes, including arrests, people jumping over security barriers, and both Ukrainian and red and black flags in the crowd, despite a ban on national symbols and security checks at the entrance. The documented presence of red and black flags, which are linked to the Ukrainian insurgent army, and the 1943 to 44 Volhynian massacres have fueled renewed hostility towards Ukrainian migrants in Poland.
It will be used as a pretext to show that the Ukrainian refugees in Poland are maybe ungrateful towards Poland. It also goes in accord with the Russian propaganda in Poland, which is trying to show Ukrainians as some kind of nationalists or fascists.
Max Korsz has called for peace in Ukraine and condemned Russia's war. In early 2022, he said Belarusians wouldn't fight against Ukraine and later released the song Svoj dom, supporting those defending their land. Despite this, his tour website still lists planned but unannounced dates in Russia.
His alleged performances in Russia are misinformation spread to fuel divisions among fans. The cities listed on his website and posters are actually from cancelled concerts that were supposed to take place in 2022, but were immediately cancelled after the full-scale war began. He left his native Belarus because he does not support the regime.
Reporting by TVP World's Anastasia Yanchenko.
The Polish government is facing questions regarding the alleged misuse of the recovery funds, a special pot of EU money designed to give European economy a post-pandemic jolt. So, what went wrong? Konrad Gorlinski tells us more in his report.
The Polish government has been in crisis management mode following recent revelations that some companies in the HoReCa sector, that's hotels, restaurants, and catering, used funds from the EU's recovery funds for purchases like company yachts, interior renovations, and even a virtual shooting range. None of these, critics say, match the program's stated goal of supporting innovation and long-term competitiveness. Heads have already rolled, and Poland's Deputy Minister of Funds and Regional Policy, Ian Szyszko, announced an audit into the agency responsible for overseeing applications for the program.
The Polish Agency for Enterprise Development ought to closely examine whether the operators who convened the expert panels that selected the beneficiaries and selected the applications met their obligations.
The issue has quickly grown partisan, as the previous government had these funds frozen by the EU due to rule of law issues. The current government managed to unlock them.
You know why they'll keep bringing this up? Because they knew very well how big of a success it was to unlock the national recovery funds. How difficult it was, and the effort it required. Despite the disasters that law and justice had caused over the years, and the fact that it's in their interest to try to discredit and attack us, they have unfortunately been given a small pretext to do so.
So how small is the pretext, really? How much money are we talking about here? The total amount of the National Recovery Program funds that Poland can tap is 15.75 billion euros. Irregularities thus far have only been found within the HoReCa sector, which was allocated around 350 million euros, which is 0.5% of the total funds. Only 25 million have been spent thus far. The National Reconstruction Plan for the HoReCa industry was initially negotiated years ago to help the tourism and catering sectors recover from the COVID pandemic. But as political disputes between Warsaw's previous government and Brussels had the funds frozen for years, they had not been made available until now. Consequently, purchases like yachts, shooting ranges, and renovations made sense for the sector then, but now, 2 years on, they might seem rather inappropriate.
And here lies the biggest problem, that politicians wanted to spend the money from the National Recovery Program at all costs because any changes in the allocation of these funds had to be consulted with Brussels. And the time we have as a country to spend this money is already very short.
Recovery funds must be spent within a limited time frame. Due to the slip-up, the government decided to relax the application criteria. The HoReCa Association in Poland has already said that it criticized the rulebook of the program. Donald Tusk also said he expects the minister responsible to provide an explanation at Tuesday's government session.
However, we can expect a detailed audit from OLAF, the supervisory body that monitors the spending of funds at the European Union level. And then there are these irregularities. If they are confirmed, we may be forced to return these funds to Brussels.
The acting president of the Polish Agency for Enterprise Development, Krzysztof Gulda, has said that preliminary findings of ongoing audits can be expected as soon as late September. Until then, the key question is whether the HoReCa program should have been rolled out at all.
Territorial concessions between Ukraine and Russia are a source of ire, confusion, and a subject of international discussion ahead of the August 15th meeting set to take place between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. So much so that Europe and Ukraine, in fear of potential fallout, are having an emergency virtual meeting this coming Wednesday with U.S. President and Vice President. Ivana Stratner, research fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, joins me here on World News Tonight to consider possible scenarios. Ivana, thank you so much for joining me again on World News Tonight.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
So, the meeting of Europe and Ukraine's leaders was confirmed with U.S. officials, that we already know. How much of an influence do you think that this meeting is going to have on the shape of the negotiations taking place on August 15th?
I think words are cheap, and Putin has been candid about his desire to completely subjugate Ukraine. And we already had multiple talks with Russia so far. And what happened so far? Nothing. I'm not very hopeful about August 15 meeting. I actually think it's going to only benefit the Kremlin, because Putin wants to show that Russia is still a great power, and it's the only country that can actually negotiate with Russia, that Ukraine should be excluded. So we're doing Putin a favor much more than he's doing us a favor. My also concern is that such negotiations might be understood with mixed signals in the West, meaning that Putin might actually just use such meetings to pose and to buy more time, and then to continue with his ambition. I also think that not inviting Ukraine is not a good thing, because there cannot be peace in that part of the world without Ukraine saying. And my last point is, President Trump believes that territory swap and by giving certain concessions to Russia can actually alter Putin's behavior. And President Zelensky said no to such concessions, which is exactly what Moscow wanted to do, because Putin is not negotiating in good faith. This is his game. He asked for something unacceptable to Ukraine, so that Ukraine rejects that offer. And then that Putin can say, you see, I'm ready to negotiate, but it's Zelensky who does not want to negotiate.
Mm-hmm. In relation to what you just said now, we've heard from Sam Greeny, a professor of Russian politics at King's College London, and he said, I quote, "The fact that Putin is going to the U.S. not as a prisoner, and that he's gone from a subject of frustration to some welcomed, and that the meeting is happening without Ukrainians and Europeans, all of that is a diplomatic win." Are we observing a resurgence of Russia on the international stage? And do you actually agree with Professor Greeny?
I think Russia, we have to understand that this war in Ukraine, it's not only about Ukraine. Russia has much bigger ambitions than, unfortunately, many people in the West do not understand. My friends and colleagues in Poland perfectly understand that Putin also wants to challenge NATO, and also to create something what Putin likes to call a multipolar world. And how do you create that so-called multipolar world? In a perception. Precisely through places such as Friday meetings, so Putin can use that and to peddle that propaganda in the global South, claiming, how Russia is still a great power. So it is a diplomatic win. And I also have to give a credit where credit is due, because I think President Trump moving a nuclear submarine, it's a step in the right direction, because my concern has been for years that every time we wanted to help Ukraine, Russia would ramp up with nuclear threats. And now that thing is removed. The second thing that I believe that President Trump has done well so far, it is to target all those countries with secondary sanctions that are fueling Russian war machine. Putin not only has to be defeated on the battlefield, but also economically. And the third thing is just the very first fact that Trump has continued to send Ukraine weapons. It's also a step in the right direction, but we also need to do more, because Ukraine needs long-range missiles. Ukraine needs other weapons. So it's a multifaceted war that we need to tackle. And my last point to that is Washington was also very blunt and about the fact that we're aware here that Putin is not going to stop at Ukraine. Putin's ambitions might actually be in the Baltic States to make sure that NATO's Article 5 is just a paper tiger. This September, we will have elections in Moldova, and make no mistake, Putin is willing and able to challenge the West also there. Putin is already at war with us using hybrid war by sabotage activities. So it's a very complex situation, and we should absolutely not try to simplify this very complex war. But my last point is we cannot win this war unless we think like the Kremlin. We do not need to act, but we have to understand how Putin thinks.
And do you think that the West is starting? Do you think that the West is actually starting to learn how to think like Kremlin?
I think even President Trump, who believed for many, many months that he can negotiate with Putin using a win-win strategy, is finally seeing through his eyes. I also think that Berlin and Paris are seeing through Putin's eyes, and they understand that Putin is preparing for another battlefield against Europe. The problem is that we are running out of time, and Putin has time on his horizon. It's been war for the past 3 years, like a full-scale invasion. And we haven't even ramped up our defense industry. We're working on it, but it's slow. We need to move faster.
We've heard from Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, who said that he holds lots of fears and lots of hope about the meeting, noting that President Trump's tactic of unpredictability at times when it comes to various moves and actions is something that he's focusing on. What is your opinion? Could those unpredictable things that Mr. Trump could come up with could actually change the way the negotiations are going to be conducted? Are we going to see some surprises from Mr. Trump ahead of August 15th that Vladimir Putin might not be aware of?
I absolutely agree that one of the things that President Trump, the tactics that he has been using is exactly unpredictability. Saying one thing today, something else tomorrow, creating that that gray space where you don't know about his next move. And that's something that Putin doesn't like. And I think Putin is also nervous to the extent, not about this meeting, but nervous about sanctions, nervous about weapons delivery, nervous about our resolve. But one thing that Putin has been also trying to do is to target the center of gravity in the West, which is our alliances. And I'm very, very pleased to see that this week countries in Europe and the United States will work together to tackle this issue. As I mentioned, I'm not really very hopeful about this meeting that they will alter the behavior of Moscow. We should also not fall for Putin's tricks to just freeze the battlefield and then to use that time to replenish his military, to strengthen his economy, and to continue his quest. And finally, we have to understand that this, what Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea want to create, so-called a multipolar world, it is something we should be paying attention and sometimes to zoom out and to understand the big picture of this war. President Trump promised to finish this war in 24 hours. It didn't work. I'm also not sure that, as I mentioned, that this war will end this Friday.
You know, just as Vladimir Putin promised, sorry to interrupt you, but just as Vladimir Putin promised that he's going to take Ukraine within 3 days. And here we are. They're still fighting.
Exactly. Absolutely. And he was not able to do that. Yes.
I would like to take a moment because we've heard during the Sunday morning features at Fox News from Vice President Vance, who said that it's not going to make the deal, the negotiations are not going to make anybody super happy. A few months ago, the U.S. signed quite a lucrative minerals deal with Ukraine, and yet the majority, just to give our viewers a brief overview, the majority of those rare earth minerals and some other important minerals in Ukraine are actually in the Donetsk and Zaporizhia Oblast that are currently in Russian hands. How do you think this issue will be addressed during the negotiations, considering that Donald Trump is actually a businessman first, and he will most likely want to see this deal through?
In the US, we like to say that there is no such a thing as a free lunch, which means that Washington likes to negotiate security issues just in the same way that they would negotiate real estate or any business effort. The problem is that with Russia, you cannot negotiate like that. And you're absolutely right. The mineral deal gave a quick win, to President Trump, but in the long run, I think it's not really going to work precisely because Russia is holding that territory. And not only that, this whole thing about territory swap is not going to work either because Ukraine has been bravely defending its own territory, and there is very little chance / no chance that President Zelensky will give up. So I think whoever believes that peace through trade will bring peace to Ukraine is sorely mistaken. That's not going to happen. That is just another thing that Putin, as a former KGB guy, understands his adversaries, and he understands how Washington thinks, and he understands that here people love to talk about business. They love to talk about cooperation. The problem is Washington likes to think in terms of the win-win strategy. Russia loves to think as a win-lose strategy, so as a zero-sum game. And that's precisely why we should understand how Putin thinks.
And so the fight continues, and we can only hope that soon we will be turning the corner when it comes to that war taking place. Ivana Stradner, Research Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Thank you so much for joining.
Always pleasure. Thank you.
Pleasure's all mine. And so this would be all for now here on World News Tonight. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska. Thank you so much for joining, and I hope to see you back here tomorrow at 8 p.m. for another World News Tonight.